Hi, my name is Aditya and I am the CEO of Automatski. Today we are going to talk about thinking and the way it is meant to be done. Now, the human brain is pretty complicated and the world over people are talking about inventing artificial intelligence. Now, I don't agree with them, basically because what is called normally as artificial intelligence is basically machine learning, which is function approximation, or deep learning, which is function approximation with neural networks. It does not have the intelligence that we normally attribute to a human brain. And just like some people believe that God made humans in his God made man in his own image, a majority of people, when they talk of artificial intelligence, they think about AI in the image of man. Making machines artificially intelligent in the image of man. Now, Automatski has been involved with artificial intelligence, not just machine learning and deep learning, for more than 2.5 decades. And we've made some fundamental breakthroughs in machine learning, deep learning, and even artificial intelligence. Now, over the course of time, we have learned a lot of things about the human brain, or the mind, which when put together in a presentation will be a very insightful reflection into our own selves and our existence, as people, as human beings. And think of it this way: if aliens were to encounter humans, what will they think of humans? How do humans think? How do they behave? And that perspective will give you real insights into who we are. And some of this, uh, not all, you might know a lot of things that I'm going to talk about today, but some of the things will be, very surprising to you. So let's get started. This is a long presentation, but let's go through with it. And I just want to say that there is nothing computational or numerical or in this presentation at all. It is just an insightful reflection on our own selves. Now, I come across people in the industry and they talk about experience. Such and such person has 4 years of experience, or we want experienced people who can take on some role, etc. But what? I mean, if I ask you to define experience, how would you define it? I mean, what is experience actually? So, from where I stand, experience is basically anecdotal experience. Now, what happens is during a course of one's career or practice, due to lots of work and due to lots of diverse work, we learn anecdotes and collect examples. And this aggregate collection, or the catalog of anecdotes and examples, is actually our aggregate experience. Whenever we encounter a problem, we try to do a pattern matching exercise with our own examples and anecdotes. Now, anecdotes are basically, these are personal examples. They are not very scientific. They usually are a personal, a story about some situation or some problem and solution, etc. And it is often regarded as an unreliable account of the situation or the problem or the solution, and sometimes hearsay. But whenever we encounter a problem, if you've been working in a certain field of science or technology or industry for a long time, you would match the pattern of the problem with the possible solutions you have learnt of or seen work in the past. And there is an element of judgment involved, where you can select between better patterns in terms of the value or the reward or the impact it will have on the problem or the situation. uh, this collectively is what is called experience, or anecdotal experience. Now, how do we take decisions? Given a problem or a choice or a situation, how do we take decisions? Obviously, there is an element of a certain kind of a domain involved which the problem fits into. Whether the domain is like the problem of leaking oil in an oil rig, so oil drilling excavation is the domain, and there is a scenario, I mean there is a situation that is you got to take a decision about, and there are some rules, and whatever is the domain, there are some rules. I mean, you can't do this will result in that, and so on. And you have a lot of choices, so you could do a lot of things. What would you I mean the entire decision making process is about making one of those choices or a few of those choices, right? And you have to predict, if you make those choices, how would the future pan out, what impact will it have, and you analyze all of this, and usually combined with judgment of value, rewards, and impact, you make a decision of going with one or a few of those choices, and that is the process of decision making. Now, life is not so simple. We have to make decisions under risk and uncertainty. Those are slightly different from each other. Uh, Certainty means that you have enough facts and evidence to know the possible results of a decision. Risk is when you are unsure of what can happen, but you know the likelihood. See, risk is usually represented with standard deviation. So you have a likelihood of a particular outcome, or the standard deviation of a particular outcome, or a variance of the outcome. Now, uncertainty is when you have an uncertain environment, you can't predict the outcomes as you have no information or data available, and you have no control over what might happen and don't even know the options you have. That is called uncertainty. Uncertainty is different from risk. Uncertainty involves a lot of unknowns, and risk involves a lot of probabilities of what can happen. So when you are making a decision under risk, so you don't know for sure how each of these alternatives will pan out and whether you will be able to achieve a goal by taking a particular decision. But you have enough understanding to know how likely each option will be successful. So in within the scope of probabilities, you make a decision, and that is decision making under risk. And whenever you are not even sure of the options and the alternatives and the outcomes of those options, you are making a decision under uncertainty, in which case you will probably use your anecdotal experience and make assumptions about the situation and the outcomes, and still make a reasonable decision under uncertainty. Basically, in the end, you would be, you know, you will end up hoping and praying, but that is what is involved with uncertainty. So that brings us to management decision making. Now, in an organization of any kind, there is usually a team on the ground, and there is usually people at the top, which are called the management, which are responsible for managing the company and the team itself. Now, the team is very aware of the realities on the ground. They understand the domain, the scenarios, the rules, the choices, etc. And they sit with the management to figure out and predict and analyze situations. But the decision comes from the management using their judgment of values, rewards, and impacts from the prediction and analysis that they have done along with the team. But primarily, the decision comes from the management because they have more context and they are privy to more insider information by virtue of being at the top of the pyramid. So, that is a typical scenario of management decision making. This is slightly different when you have repeatable operations. Whenever you have operations which are repeatable, or there is a standard process or a practice, The team works on the standard repeatable stuff, and the manager creates the reports. The leadership or the top management uh, does not have to involve the team because the operations are pretty standard. They understand the operations pretty well. So they themselves do the prediction analysis and use a judgment to take the decision, sitting very far away in the corporate headquarters. That is normally the case with, you know, uh, running operations. In recent times, we've been talking about bottom up organizations, empowerment, scaling organizations, culture, etc. Now, in a bottom up organization, the team on the ground understands the domain, scenarios, rules, choices, prediction, and makes the predictions, analysis, and judgment themselves. The management gives them the exoskeleton or the bounds within which the teams can operate and work on their own. The management controls the budgets, the rules, the constraints, the context, goals, and the escalations when shit hits the roof. But other than that, the organization is completely bottom up, and functions. The teams function independently, more or less. Now, in the recent past, a lot of people have been talking about a first principles approach to solving problems, etc. Now, a first principles approach starts from the context and the domain in which you want to solve the problems. You challenge the model, you challenge the assumptions, constraints, rules, etc. You collect data, facts, build a small model, test, create and test hypothesis, make predictions and a decision with using your judgment. So, first principles approach is basically when you start from the ground up, basically ab initio. You don't build upon something that already exists. You analyze everything from scratch, and that is a first principles based approach. It is very a lot of successes are attributed to first principles based approaches, and it helps us solve problems which are otherwise considered unsolvable. Research is a cliche. I mean, I know people who call their entire 20,000 people organizations as so and so German research center or the China research center or whatever. But that's not actually research. But research has a certain meaning or a connotation along with it. Now you start the research has to be directed towards something. So there are obviously some bounds. There is a context, there is a domain, there are some problems you're interested in solving, and you are tinkering around and challenging the models, assumptions, constraints, rules, etc. Just like first principles based approach, you move with research pretty much in the same direction, but you start building prototypes, you incorporate feedback, you repeat, you iterate, improve, and you end up filing patents or writing research papers, because the primary output of research is usually patents and research papers. So that is the process where where research is like a first principles based approach but extends it beyond that to prototyping and iterative improvements and the output of patents and research papers. Now, innovation is another cliche, and people talk about innovation, everything as innovation, but that uh, the the understanding of what is innovation is slightly different from what you will hear about when you talk to somebody very casually. Now, obviously, there is a problem, and you want to generate and try out new options and alternatives. You want to try out more combinations. The approach is towards incremental improvements, so it is normally called incremental innovation. And you prototype, you get feedback, you iterate, and you occasionally end up making breakthroughs. But what is different between innovation and other kinds of efforts is that innovation has to make the results manifest. So you have to end up in developing the product or the service and its commercialization. Uh, and innovation which is not developed to production grade or commercialization is basically, partial research where you are not even writing patents or research, filing patents or writing research papers. So this definition of innovation will be different from what you normally hear people talk about when they say innovation. My country, India, is specifically famous for a certain kind of frugal innovation, which is locally called jugaad. In English, it means a hack. Now, there are situations in life when you have a problem. There is a certain domain of the problem, like an automobile or transportation or farming or something like that. And normally, due to various technology reasons or regulatory compliance reasons or otherwise physical reasons, there are a lot of constraints and rules. But you tend to violate some constraints and rules and generate a few options and choices on the side, and you do some analysis and implement a temporary solution that works. This is called a hack or a jugaad, and it is very common in where I'm from. Critical thinking. If you were to look at you know a lot of things from a critical perspective, what would it involve? Now, as human beings, we are full of emotions, biases, etc. But in science and the scientific community, we believe that there is a lot of critical thinking involved in the scientific process. So usually you start with data and facts and assumptions, and you model the problem or the domain at hand, and you make arguments, you make hypotheses, you test the hypothesis, you make theories. There are opinions which you need to consider or disregard completely. People will make assertions, and there are people with vested interests, and you have to look at you know who's behind a statement or a proclamation, what is his credibility, reputation, and authority, and what kind of power somebody has or wants to gain from saying or doing something. If you think along these lines, with this kind of a thinking, it is what is called critical thinking. Now, the world is extremely complex. I'm not talking about the universe only, but the human world, the place where we live, the industries where we work in, are very complex. And there is something called many model thinking and a many model thinker. Now, when you look at the world or a situation or an industry, you have a model of it in your mind or on paper, right? And how things work. Now, many model thinkers are people who can look at a reality from various perspectives as using various models. So let's say somebody looks at physics and thinks of oscillators. Somebody looks at physics and looks at it from the point of energy or waves and wave functions, etc. So these are basically this is called many model thinking. And what happens is that you look at a domain or a problem and you use analogies and various perspectives, and you build multiple models and you repeat and iterate and improve and make occasional breakthroughs. Now, single models perform well, but a model is only an approximation of reality. So, with that line of argument, we can say that multi models will be better at representing reality, and that is why the best thinkers in the world, the most accurate predictors, the most effective people in the world use an ensemble of models to look at reality, and this is what I call many model thinkers. We say think from somebody else's perspective. Uh, What does that mean? If you know the other person, his situation, his constraints, his rules, or the rules he's operating under, and the data he has access to, etc., and you project yourself into his shoes under those constraints and rules, and you do a mental simulation making projections and decisions on his behalf, that is called as a perspective, thinking from somebody else's perspective. So it is said that every individual has his own perspective, his own constraints, rules, and the way he takes decisions, that is his perspective. One of the known ways of solving a problem is called lateral thinking, where you have multiple domains and you have seen something work, and you can draw some analogy or similarities between multiple domains or multiple problems, and by drawing these analogies and superimposing them on a new scenario or a problem, you can gain insights or cross apply solutions. This lateral application or cross application of insights and of analogies, similarities, and problem solving to gain insights and solve problems is called lateral thinking. Now, another cliche, at least, especially in the industry where I work, is ideation. Ideation is when you're talking about an individual, and brainstorming is when you are talking about a collection of individuals or a group. So now, if you get a lot of people together and say, make a rule that nothing is stupid, here are the boundaries and constraints and the thing that we need to think about. Now, why don't all of you come up with new ideas, try combining and mixing ideas and improving existing ideas, tinker and make accidental breakthroughs and make notes. You know, this process is basically ideation when done by an individual and brainstorming when done in a group. Now, sometimes we say that, here is a problem or something we need to think about or solve, but we don't have access to resources or the ability to do it physically or practically. So what we end up doing is called a thought experiment. We look at a domain, a context, a problem, we memorize the constraints and the rules, we think about the options and choices inside our head, and we analyze and simulate the impact and the evolution of those decisions and choices and options. And we do this multiple times, and we occasionally end up making breakthroughs. All this activity inside one's brain to solve problems in a fashion of simulating the problem and the choices together is called a thought experiment, or in other words, mental simulation. Now, I know something that I cannot do, and that is, I can't paint, I can't dance. Such things are usually associated with the concept of creativity, or artistic abilities. Now, when we say, but what is creativity? Or what is the thing that we do? Now, whether it is art, painting, fashion, or such similar things, there is a domain, obviously, like dance, or a particular kind of or a flavor of dance. There is obviously some skill, talent, and mastery involved. So people practice it for a lot of time. But the essence of the thing is that there are infinite options, and the combination of the options is literally in gazillions. It is infinite, and you can't create something analytically or by solving a formula or making deterministic choices. What you end up is doing is you make heuristic choices about the width of the dress, or the size of the seam, or the thread that will hang from the shoulder or whatever, and you use patterns and your experience, etc., and your judgment, and you create something, you get feedback, you repeat, you iterate, you improve. This is the creative process. I mean, if you see people who are involved with art or performing art or music or movies or writing, fiction writers, and this is what is called the creative domain, and that is how human beings you know uh, are creative. I mean, but what are the kind of problems that we normally solve, when we as humans, when we what are the kind of problems we encounter mostly? So they are in two broad categories. The first kind of problems is that you are given a lot of constraints and you need to find any solution that satisfies all the constraints. I mean, the ball cannot move to the left, it can only go to the right. I mean, you can move up. The green ball can only move to the right, and so on and so forth. And you find some solution that satisfies all the constraints. How you do it is up to you. Now, the other variant of that is that there are some hard constraints which you need to satisfy all the time, and then there are some soft constraints which are good to have, and you should try to maximize the number of soft constraints that you can solve. And you need to come up with any solution that solves that satisfies all the hard constraints and as many of soft constraints as possible. The third type of the problems that we encounter and try to solve as humans is basically we need to maximize or minimize something. We need to optimize something. So, given some formulation or an expression and a domain in which you need to work in, or whatever be the problem you're trying to solve, you need to maximize or minimize something, and that is the problem that you need to solve. Now, the combination of the first two types and the third type is the fourth type of problem, which is maximizing or minimizing or doing an optimization under constraints so that you satisfy all the constraints and yet you maximize or minimize something. The fifth and the last category is basically doing all of these things under with a lot of randomness, a lot of probabilities, when a lot of probabilities are involved, when the constraints vary randomly, or the formulation that you need to optimize or maximize or minimize has an element of randomness. That is the fifth category of problems we try to solve. This is distinct from the logic and reasoning problems that humans normally solve. Now, in logic and reasoning, we are given some symbols and rules and some facts. We make some predictions and we apply to new scenarios. Now, what we're trying to do is to find out that given the symbols, rules, and facts, can we predict and find out if something will be true or false by being consistent with all the facts and rules, or if something is consistent, if we are told that something is true, if the is that consistent with all the symbols, rules, facts that we already know. So that kind of a projection and reasoning is called logic and reasoning. Now humans, the the input to the human brain is usually in the form of communication, which is through a human language, spoken or written language, or through vision or whatever, and the output is also usually through a communication, or written or verbal communication. Now, these are the kind of human languages that we speak and across the world in the proportion of uh, the number of people speaking these languages. So you can look at this diagram. One of the things that we are obsessed about is intelligence. I mean, uh, it is. I mean. There was a serial called Big Bang Theory. It's a TV series, and it has some PhDs, and it has a lady, and it is quite geeky in the sense that it is very famous with people who consider themselves intelligent or geeky, and now it is understood that we are obsessed with intelligence, but what is intelligence actually? Now, given some domains and some problems, and you have a lot of combinatorial solution possibilities, a very large combinatorial solution space. We have to use heuristics, anecdotes, patterns, logic reasoning, or simply recall the solution from memory if we can. And the idea is to solve the problem in the fastest time. That is what is the quintessential definition of intelligence, or the connotation of intelligence that we normally have. Intelligence is measured using something called the intelligence quotient, which actually measures logic, spatial awareness, verbal reasoning, and visual abilities. Now, it is not a test that which you can study and practice for. I mean, these are uh, tests that are looking at your inherent ability to use logic to solve problems, to recognize patterns, and to make associations between different pieces of information. And over the years, the scores on these IQ tests have increased because of something called the Flynn effect. Now, this is because, over the years, a lot of us are exposed to more and more scenarios, or we do a lot of work where, uh, our cognitive abilities are used, or are cognitively demanding. Now, there isn't one IQ test. I mean, uh, contrary to what is commonly believed, there are multiple kinds of IQ tests trying to measure something that is similar. And this IQ test is measured as, standard deviation. You see the graph, probability graph here. In the center, you have 100. And people with very low and very high scores are very far and few. Most of the people of the human population are towards the center. Now, this test has evolved over time, and today, since 2003, it measures general intelligence, knowledge, fluid reasoning, quantitative reasoning, visual spatial processing, working memory, non-verbal IQ, and verbal IQ. Whatever that means, it has become much more elaborate over the years. Now, a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about the IQ test and the IQ number. Now, it is assumed that Albert Einstein, who was one of the most famous scientists in modern history, had an IQ of around 160. But it is debatable if he ever gave an IQ test. People are not sure of that also. Now, it is known that Einstein had trouble clearing his university exams and getting into university. And yet he turned out to be such a remarkable scientist. Now, another person, Marilyn, uh, her IQ was estimated as 228 and was listed in the Guinness Book of World Records in 1985. Terence was called the Mozart of math, a child math prodigy who now teaches at UCLA, which is University of California at Los Angeles. His IQ ranges between 211 to 230. And Manan had an estimated IQ of 268. So there are people, I mean, if you ask somebody and you tell him that you have an IQ of 145, he will laugh at you, and he'll say that, that is not possible, or probably that is very rare. But there have been people with measured IQs way beyond, the normal ranges of 160, 150, etc. Now, Michael Kearney received four bachelor degrees and a doctorate by the time he was 22. I mean, his first was when he was just 10, and his IQ was said to range between 200 and 325. Nikola Tesla is often considered the most intelligent person in modern history. I mean, there is a quote which nobody is sure if Einstein really said it or not, but when Einstein was asked how it felt to be the smartest man alive, Einstein replied, "I don't know, you'll have to ask Nikola Tesla." Nikola Tesla was an Austrian. He uh, is known for many of his inventions, and his IQ was set to range between 160 and 310. Now, the average IQ score is 100, and this is the various, ranges and what it means based on empirical evidence, what is measured and seen experimentally. Now, very few individuals, 0.2%, have a score of more than 145 or less than 55. So, people beyond that are basically far and few, just a few isolated cases. Now, as humans, we are said to have feelings or emotions. University of California at Berkeley has identified 27 emotions, and these are used in various emojis and various online applications. And that is why, while a lot of people have cataloged a lot of emotions, the 27 emotions from UC Berkeley are quite famous because they are used in various emojis and online platforms. Now, what is a feeling? A feeling is a physical sensation of touch through experience or perception. You experience something or you perceive something, and it is also a conscious experience created after the physical experience sensation or emotional experiences. And emotions are not physical sensations, but they are felt through an emotional experience, and they are manifested in the unconscious mind that can be associated with various thoughts that we have or beliefs, desires, and actions. So we, while getting hurt physically is a physical sensation, the feeling of anger or awe or admiration is not a physical feeling, and yet it is an emotion. It is felt through emotional experience. Another thing that people are obsessed with, usually youngsters, is the concept of love. You know, the love of a lifetime, or we are made for each other, and so on and so forth. But as per Cambridge Dictionary, love is defined as liking another adult very much and being romantically and sexually attracted to them, or having strong feelings of liking a friend or a person in your family. I mean, usually you don't have a sexual attraction to a friend or your family members, but outside that, you are romantically and sexually attracted to other people. That is love. And what is love at first sight? Basically, I mean, if you think about it critically, when you have had a mental picture of someone you would really want to fuck in your mind for a long time, and you finally see someone like it, you feel what is called love at first sight. And when we say the couple is made for each other, it is a kind of a Nash equilibrium where neither individual in the couple, thinks that they have compromised or settled for less, or that they could do better. I mean, so they are, perfect, made for each other. Now, there is a silent voice inside your head, an urge, a strange sensation, in various scenarios in your life when you are, moving around, talking to people, you have this feeling which is called a gut feeling, or you have a reaction which is a gut reaction, or an emotional reaction to something. It may be negative or a positive feeling of comfort or trust when you meet someone. Now, gut feelings are generally regarded as not modulated by conscious thought, but sometimes attributed as a feature of intuition rather than rationality. Now, it is considered unconscious, irrational, and intuitive. Now, the argument is that gut feelings might not be as random as they seem. They might be based on a rapid appraisal of a situation, and we might not realize it always. But the brain is constantly comparing our current situation with our memories and patterns of previous situations. So, when a decision feels intuitive or you get a gut feeling about something, it might in fact be based on years of experience or what you have been through in your life. And so, while you cannot trust a gut feeling and take a decision just based on gut feeling, but it is enough for you to explore that option out. Now, as humans, we feel pleasure and pain. And basically, what is involved is the opioid and dopamine neural systems. Now, opioid is responsible for the actual experience of sensation, uh, and dopamine is responsible for the anticipation or expectation of the experience. So, dopamine is active in areas of the brain region known as basal ganglia, and it is the same region which responds to positive stimuli such as food or sex. Opioid works in the modulation of pleasure or pain relief by either blocking the neurotransmitters released or by hyperpolarizing the neurons by opening up a potassium channel which effectively temporarily blocks the neurons. So basically, opioid will suppress your pain. Now, some people claim and that they enjoy pain and that there is a good pain and a bad pain. A good pain is enjoyable versus a bad pain which is agonizing. And sometimes in life you have to bear pain, uh, especially when you are involved with activities like running, hot massages, tattoos, piercing, or in sports or in the gym, etc. Now, the pain of intense exertion releases lactic acid, and it is caused by the breakdown of glucose when oxygen is in short supply. Now, this irritates the pain receptors in the muscles and causes a warm sensation, and it communicates the plight to the brain through electrical messages. These are then interpreted as a burning sensation in the legs or arms or whatever, and the sports person or the athlete then tends to slow down or stop. Some people like to eat chilies, and it gives them a kind of a pain or a sensation that they can enjoy. Now, what happens is the nervous system's control center, the hippocampus, kicks in, and it results in the production of body's own narcotics called endorphins. This protein binds to opioid receptors in the brain and prevents the release of chemicals involved in the transmission of pain signals. So basically, you don't feel the pain, and this blocks the pain, but uh, endorphins further stimulate the brain's limbic and prefrontal regions, uh, which are also activated by love affairs and music. Now, this post pain rush is similar to the high of morphine or heroin, which also binds to the brain's opioid receptors. Now, the pain of intense exercise also causes a spike in another of body's painkillers called anandamide. This is called the bliss chemical, which which blocks the pain signals and induces the warm fuzzy pleasure emulated by marijuana, which binds to the same receptors. Adrenaline, also produced in response to pain, adds to the excitement by raising the athlete's heart rate. Now, that is why some people also enjoy the pain, and this is the entire procedure of pain and the body's response to it. Now, paracetamol is a pain-killing drug which is very common, and it relieves pain but also blunts the feeling of pleasure. Morphine is used to suppress severe pain, usually when somebody is severely hurt, like somebody's leg gets amputated, and you give him some morphine injections. Now, after intense pleasure, there is a drop. It is the sadness, depression, and emptiness after pleasure. And people uh, have a thrill seeking behavior when they repeatedly desire more and more intense pleasures, because every intense pleasure will be followed by a drop. So they desire more and more intense pleasures. And this thrill is a sudden feeling of excitement and pleasure. And this pattern of thrill seeking behavior of intense pleasures and drops is the thrill seeking behavior that is very common with humans. Fear is something that is used to avoid or reduce harm. It is a function of the brain. Depending on what we have learned about the past, fear can protect us from dangerous situations. We become capable of doing many things we wouldn't typically be able or willing to do in order to stop the threat. Now, the immediate threat of harm focuses our attention, mobilizing us to cope with the danger. So, fear can actually save our lives by forcing us to react without having to think about it, like jumping out of the way of a car coming at us. Typically, there are three evolutionary preset reactions to fear, to a situation in terms of fear. Now, they are fight, flight, and freeze. Fight means you fight or attack. Flight means you run away, and freeze means you just immobilize. You get immobilized. Whenever you experience changes or challenges, your body produces physical and mental responses. That is called stress. There are a lot of physical symptoms like aches, pains, chest pain, exhaustion, headaches, high blood pressure, muscle tension, digestive problems, and trouble having sex, weak immune system, etc. Now, it can lead to a lot of emotional and mental symptoms like anxiety, irritability, depression, panic attacks, and sadness. People try to escape stress by refusing to think or act, lethargy, not doing anything, procrastinating, excessive sleeping. Something is wrong if you're sleeping too much. Concocting alternate reality and imaginary things, friends, relying on alcohol, drugs, smoking, gambling, overeating, or participating compulsively in sex, shopping, or internet browsing, or getting violent. But the real long term solution lies in exercise, reflection about life, the meaning of life, the situation at hand, uh, and what can be done by structure and planning, saying no to excessive work demands by having a positive attitude, and in the end accepting your losses, losses, the reality of this world, and that nobody cares, and that you are not that important to the world at large. And if nothing works, relaxation, meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, muscle relaxation, etc. Now, panic attacks are sudden, unreasonable feelings of fear and anxiety that cause physical symptoms like racing heart, fast breathing, sweating, and some people are so fearful of these attacks that they develop panic disorder, a type of anxiety disorder. Therapy and anti-anxiety medications can stop panic attacks. Now, there are a lot of symptoms. I will not go through them, but the treatment is through psychotherapy, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety medication. Besides, intelligence, we talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is our ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions, to understand, interpret, and respond to the emotions of others. Now, what is involved with emotional intelligence is the ability to listen, to feel, to think, to reflect, to be aware of your own self, have empathy, and emotional intelligence is also used to manipulate and deceive other people. So, it is said that emotional intelligence uh, is a better indicator of success in the human society than IQ alone. The third kind of intelligence is called social intelligence or interpersonal dynamics. Now, it is the capacity to know oneself and know others, and develops from experience with people and learning from success and failures in social settings. It is more commonly referred to as a tact or a common sense or street smarts. Now, it is the ability to successfully build relationships and navigate social environments. You have to be socially aware to sense other people's feelings, listen with full receptivity, understands others' thoughts and intentions, and have the ability and the understanding to work with a web of relationships. Now, knowing how to have smooth, effective interactions, interacting smoothly, knowing how you are perceived by others, trying to shape the outcome of social interactions, and caring about others' needs. And basically, this is what is involved in a civil human society. The social intelligence is at play here. Now, if you are not that good at socially, you would be lonely, you would have superficial relationships, little or no friend circle, and a distorted gender ratio of friends. Now, the treatment for social intelligence is basically having a secure base in which you can retreat and recharge frequently. You can role play with your friends, and learn how to react in situations, verbal fluency, conversational skills, so that you don't feel inadequate, and understanding social rules, roles, scripts, etc. The ability to listen to people, to pick up cues, and understand your impression on other people. And you have to avoid what is called the dark triad. You have to avoid people who are narcissistic. I can't even pronounce Machiavellian, and the psychopaths. Now, emotional and social intelligence competencies are of multiple kinds, and these are self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And this is what has been studied for a long time. We are, as humans, required to be politically correct in a lot of regions of the world. It is expected from us. But political correctness is a term used to describe, language policies or measures that are intended to avoid offending other people, or making them feel, disadvantaged, a particular member or a group in society. Now, publicly and in the media, the term is used with the implication that these political correctness is excessive or unwarranted. You should not be politically correct. You should be direct and, uh, call a tooth and nail a nail. But in a lot of regions, in situations, we are expected to be politically correct. Now, it is said that as humans, we have an attitude, we have a manner, a disposition, a feeling, with regard to ourselves, our tendency, our orientation, especially of the mind. Now, an attitude is basically a tendency or a predisposition to, uh, in the process of evaluating an object or a symbol of that object in a certain way. If I come across a situation or something, and I have a predisposition towards, the what I think about it, that is called an attitude. And it is usually said that somebody has a positive attitude, a negative attitude, threatening attitude, relaxed attitude. Somebody is chilled out. Somebody is very calm and composed, etc. Now, normally, when you see somebody who's very handsome or beautiful, you say he has a nice personality. But the definition of personality is not exactly that. It is a characteristic pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that make a person unique. And on my left, there is a framework that is used, called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator (MBTI). It is used to map the personality of a person. Basically, the word personality stems from the Latin word persona, or the mask that people wear in theaters while they're performing different roles to disguise their identities. But, you know, in a layman's language, we normally say that she has a generous, caring, and a perfectionist personality. Now, when we see reality, the world around us, or when we see something, we create a mental model. It's an explanation of how something works in the real world inside our brains. And usually, what happens is that all humans have various mental models for various realities or aspects of this world. And we solve problems in our mind long before we solve it on paper, or we make the solution manifest physically. Now, mental simulation is related to mental models. Mental models are very simple, scaled down, intuitive versions, and usually better versions of the reality around us. It is said that Nikola Tesla's mental models were superior to all known theories of the world, electricity, physics, etc., at that time. And that is the reason why Nikola Tesla was such a successful inventor. We say somebody is wise, or it is the wisdom of the ages. But what is being wise or having wisdom? Now, life is very complex. There are unreliable assumptions that we make. We have incomplete information, too many choices, too many possibilities, too many unknowns, and too little time. Now, wisdom is actually using analogies, mental models, reasoning, insights, anecdotal experience, judgment, and decision making under risk and uncertainty, and making quick decisions. That is what is involved, which is called wisdom or being wise. This is different from, when you use a first principles based approach, or when you're doing research, or when you're innovating, etc. Wisdom usually comes with age and reflection and experience. Now, being healthy as a human has psychological aspects, biological aspects, and social aspects. And food can make huge impact to the human brain, to the health of the human brain. Now, this is really, these slides are very verbose. I'm not going to read them line by line, but fatty fish is supposed to be really good for the brain because it is a rich source of omega 3 fatty acid, and 60% of our brain is made of fat, and half of that fat is comprised of omega 3 fatty acids. So obviously it is said that fatty fish is one of the best things for a human brain. The next best thing is tea and coffee, because the two main components in tea and coffee are caffeine and antioxidants, which support the brain health. They increase alertness, uh, and they also improve the mood, and reduce diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Blueberries, deliver anthocyanins. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that, but that is used for anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. Now, uh, antioxidants can help you with, you know, the aging of the brain and inflammation, neurodegenerative diseases, etc. Turmeric has been known to cross the blood-brain barrier. It can easily go from your blood into the brain, and it can benefit the cells there. It is a potent antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compound. Now, it helps improve memory with people with Alzheimer's and plaques that are a hallmark of the disease, and various other compounds which improve the mood and helps these cells grow. Broccoli is also a powerful plant. It has powerful plant compounds, antioxidants, and vitamin K. And vitamin K is essential for forming a type of fat that's densely packed into brain cells, and it gives better memory and cognitive status. Besides anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects, pumpkin seeds are powerful antioxidants that protect the body and brain from free radical damage. Free radical is basically a term used with chemistry, a radical that is free to react. Now, they are an excellent source of magnesium, iron, zinc, and copper, which are useful for the human brain and to prevent disorders and deficiencies. Dark chocolate is packed with brain boosting compounds using flavonoids, caffeine, and antioxidants. Dark chocolate has 70% or greater cocoa content, while the normal milk chocolate has between 10 to 50%. And it is a great mood booster also, and helps with learning and memory. Nuts are generally very beneficial to the brain, and they contain healthy fats, antioxidants, and vitamin E. But walnuts have an extra edge as they deliver anti-inflammatory omega 3 fatty acids. Oranges gives you higher levels of vitamin C, which improve focus, memory, attention, and decision speed. And they are also antioxidants, and they prevent major depressive disorders like anxiety, schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease, etc. There are other sources of vitamin C, but oranges are the best known source of vitamin C that is commonly available to us. Eggs have several nutrients that are useful to the human brain, including vitamins B6 and B12, folate, and choline. Now, eggs can be used to regulate, mood and memory. Now, green tea, besides, caffeine, green tea also has L-theanine, which can also cross the blood-brain barrier and increase the neurotransmitters GABA activity. It reduces anxiety and makes you feel more relaxed. It controls your mood, makes you and it counters the effects of stimulating effects of caffeine, and that is why green tea is better than normal caffeine or tea. What you've been told about the human brain might be something like this, that the right half is used for creativity and the left half is used for science and maths, etc. But let me tell you, there are a lot of myths about the human brain. I'm not going to go read out all of the slides, but I'm going to tell you about them in summary. Now, the myth is that we use only 10% of our brains. That is actually wrong. Uh, PET and fMRI scans show that much of the brain is engaged even while doing simple tasks. And what happens is that if you lose parts of the brain, you can get crippled, and yet people lose a few parts of the brain and they still function very well. Now, the second myth is that it is all downhill after 40. I mean, you're old. I mean, yes, younger people have better cognitive skills. A mathematician or a scientist is at his prime in his 20s. That is true, but with age, you gain in experience, vocabulary, wisdom, etc. You can judge people's character better. You have social wisdom, and you are able to settle conflicts better than younger people. The other myth is that we have only five senses. People talk about sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. Yeah, but we have many other ways of sensing the world and our place in it. Proprioception is the sense of how our bodies are positioned. Nociception is the sense of pain. We also have a sense of balance in our inner ear. And we also have a sense of body temperature, acceleration, and passage of time. These are the other senses that we have. It is not just the five senses. And people say that the brain is hardwired. I mean, there are pathways, and the brain communicates through those pathways, releasing pulses and electricity, etc. But one of the most remarkable discoveries in neuroscience in the past few decades is that the brain is remarkably plastic. In blind people, parts of the brain that were normally processing sight are used for hearing. And for example, when someone practices a new skill like learning to play a violin, the parts of brain rewire, with each other when this learning is in progress. And people with brain injuries can use other parts of the brain to compensate for the lost, portions of his brain. Now, one of the most funny things about movies and theater is that if you hit somebody on the head, it can cause amnesia. That is not true. I mean, there are two main forms of amnesia: anterograde, the inability to form new memories, and retrograde, the inability to recall past events. And none of them are related to being hit on the head or being hit on the head twice to lose the memory and to regain it. That is simply, a myth. Now, the other myth is that we know what will make us happy. We actually overestimate what something will make us happy. Things that will make us happy, like like a holiday or whatever. But you know, people are relatively happy more or less uh, compared to the kind of money that they have. We overestimate the happiness and underestimate, our ability to deal with tragedies. I mean, after the loss, paralysis, or death of a loved one, life does, I mean, you do get grief and despair, but life does, get back on track, and people are remarkably resilient. So we overestimate and underestimate our ability to adapt and recover. The other myth is that we see the world as it is. That is not true. As humans, our process of looking at the world is based on our perception, is based on our predispositions. And we don't look at the world in all objectivity. We look at the world from the perspective or the lens that we already have. Now, another shoddy, sloppy, belief is that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. While, People have tried to reason that the size of the head, the spinal cord, etc., are responsible for women's inability to think, logically or practice medicine, etc. But that is, if it comes to what our brains do most of the time, like perceive the world, direct attention, learn new skills, encode memories, communicate, etc. Men and women have almost entirely overlapping and fully earthbound abilities. There is no difference between, a male brain and a female brain inherently. Now, let us see how the plasticity in the brain works. In blind people, there is a device called BrainPort V100 that has been, uh, that has gotten FDA clearance in US. Now, what it does is it places a camera on the glasses of the blind person, and that camera feeds signals to a grid of electrodes kept on the blind person's tongue, and through these signals on the of the electrodes on his tongue, a blind person's brain achieves the ability to see the world around him, in a grid of 400 pixels. So it is not really high definition or high resolution vision, but yes, they achieve the ability to see the world around themselves in the sense of vision, the ability to see. And this, the brain achieves by rewiring itself, which is called plasticity, and repurposing its the parts of human brain. Now, the term psychology is basically the study of mind and behavior, why people behave the way they do. You know, the study of conscious, unconscious feelings, thoughts, and it is of various types like cognitive psychology, forensic psychology, social development psychology, etc., for children, etc. Now, it is basically the study of behavior, mind and behavior. When we have abnormal thoughts, feelings, and behavior, we are said to have a psychological disorder, assuming that those thoughts are not just because they are rare in humans, but because they are inherently abnormal, or thoughts. And these psychopathology is a study of psychological disorders, including their symptoms, causes, and treatment. Now, this is very different from things that you would consider unconventional. Unconventional or rare is not the definition of a psychological disorder. Now, it actually focuses on the word disorder. I mean, if you are dating somebody and you get rejected, you will feel dejected. But if you lose interest in life, in eating, sleeping, you feel utterly worthless, you contemplate suicide, etc., then it would be a psychological disorder. And the treatment is usually intervention by friends and peers or professional therapy and counseling. There are many kinds of psychological disorders: anxiety disorders, somatoform disorders, dissociative disorders, mood disorders, personality disorders, development disorders, and eating disorders. And you can look them up. Now, beyond psychological disorders, there is something called psychiatric disorder. It is a mental pattern that causes significant distress or impairment of personal functioning. Now, this can be persistent, it can be relapsing, remitting, or it can occur in single episodes. Now, uh, there are symptoms of agitation, anxiety, depression, mania, psychosis, paranoia, etc. And the causes can be genetic, environmental, physical damage, trauma, etc. And the only treatment for psychiatric disorders that is known today is medication. As humans, we see the world around us and we have a world view in our mind. The world view is in our mind, it is our understanding of this world. It is it is your point of view of the world. What you uh, the answer to the question, what is this world? And that is your worldview. Now, inside your mind, you also have a residual mental image. That is the answer to the question, who am I in my own mind? It is a mental picture of how I see myself, or probably how others see me, or how I perceive others see me. which may or may not be true. It can be exaggerated, it can be, inaccurate. But this self-image is used by psychologists because this is the worldview, and our residual mental image is our engine of thought process of living our life and thinking, how we think and what we think. Now, where do we go from here? The motivation or drive is basically our own desire and actions to make our residual mental image a reality. If in your mind you think that you are a successful businessman running a $1 billion company, you got to make it a reality, and you should have the motivation and drive to make it a reality. The energy is basically the intensity of your motivation and actions. If you don't give up, you keep trying rationally, making choices, and failures are something you simply reflect upon and jump over on your way to achieving, making your residual mental image a reality. Now, we are here to put a dent in this universe, otherwise, why else even be here? Thank you. It was a pleasure. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@automatski.com. Thank you very much.